Hi, so welcome back to The Mind of the Writer, and I'm with Susannah Rigg again. And if you haven't checked out the first part of the conversation, I invite you to, check out last week's video. So we're going to continue our conversation, and we're going to start off by picking up with something I said last time. And I was talking about looking at yourself as an author, a bona fide author, just because you write and you write novels and you create fiction. And Susannah, I would like to know what your view is on that.
I think for me, it's a little bit less about the titles. I do consider myself a writer. Whether I would say author, there's still a little bit of a struggle in there, if I'm honest, for me. But it's something I work with a lot with my mentoring clients, to even get to say writer, and what does that mean? And if you're writing, you're a writer. So perhaps if you're writing novels, you're a author, like it goes along the same line. It's just, for me, there's that jump, and that's my own stuff. But for me, it's also not, it's almost less about that and more about this experience of writing. And I would, I guess, call on to like Elizabeth Gilbert and her knowledge around this, and her wisdom around this, around why you write. And the whole point for me is that I write because I can't not write. And so therefore, whatever I am, as long as I've got this feeling that I get when I'm writing, that's the important bit for me. And yes, I'd love to have my novels published. And writing that first novel, I just learned so much. I learned how to write a novel. I got so much life experience going into the jungle by myself, talking to people, learning, spending 2 weeks in this amazing library in southern Mexico in Chiapas. Like I learned so much. And so for me, that was worth it in itself. Whether that novel is published, whether it's never published, whether that becomes the novel that's always in the drawer forever, it doesn't matter. That's it was worth it, for all of that. So that's sort of where I get to with it.
The mind work, the creative work, often takes you out into the world. And this is the thing. My first novel was set in Mexico, and so we decided, okay, we're going to go to Mexico, because now I need to go to these locations, and I've already described them in the novel, but I need to feel the atmosphere. I need to get the details, pick up on the ambience, and so we went to Mexico. And so even though it was the novel that sort of took us there, in the end it became a sort of a cross-country family vacation. And in fact, the children will never look back on it as, mom was writing a novel. And no, for them it was, this big family, Mexican trip. And the same with The Girl on Harlow Street. I had not been back to England for 16 years. And, for many sort of valid reasons. But once I started to work on the story, then it was like, okay, no, now I need to go back. And I think that then you realize that the creative work, exactly like you say, it takes you out into the world. You have new experiences that you wouldn't have normally had. Maybe you're going to meet new people. It's so much more than the sentences on the paper. It's almost the sentences are like lines leading you into yourself, and goes out into the world, and you have to do it. And I feel a little bit like this with these daily poems on LinkedIn at the moment. I never intended for that to happen, but I'm doing them every day, and it can be tiring because it's a lot of creativity. But what did happen is I decided I was going to take a few days off to rest my brain, thinking that I needed a rest. And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's just, I usually get up then the poem started to come, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to write you. I've told everybody that I'm taking a break. And so a couple of days, I was actually not very happy in this break, because I was stunting something that just wanted to be, and just wanted to, wanted to go out into the world, like, so I do understand that for sure. So in one of your newsletters, and I think that this is really interesting, you talk about embodied writing, and you talk about parts of the body leading you into the story. And again, this for me is an example of something that's very physical, leading you into something that's quite imaginary or heady, or how would we call this, ethereal, or non-physical. So could you explain what embodied writing is?
Yeah, so this was quite, I mean, and I admit this in the newsletter, it's quite a strange one. But I am surrounded and kind of live in quite a community of quite spiritual people, and spirituality can be very heady, or very kind of beyond the head, even, and so can writing. And I've always kind of had this feeling of like, we're physically embodied, and so therefore there's a reason for that. And so I've always been really drawn to things like dance, this ecstatic dance, yoga, even some tantra practices that just like are really about the body, and not about trying to somehow overcome the body. And so I was just thinking about this and thinking about writing, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I can just see what can guide my writing. And there's always like interesting ways to find prompts for writing. And I thought, I'm just going to sit there in the morning and see and feel into my body and see if any part of my body wants to tell a story. But I had a rule that the story couldn't be like the story of my trauma or past, or, these kind of things that, there's books about that, like The Body Keeps Score, various other books, about how our body actually holds on to traumatic events, etc., and how we can work with that. But it wasn't about that. It was about fiction stories. And so I was sitting there, waiting, and yeah, my neck speaks up. Like, I feel this, like, oh, my neck wants to tell a story. And then the story comes out, and I can't remember exactly which story that was now, but there was a story of this young 19-year-old boy who sort of had the weight of the world on his shoulders and was having to take care of his sister. And this character was like nothing I'd ever written before. And the voice was like nothing I'd ever written before. And I was like, oh, there's something in this. This is interesting, because again, it's sort of that thing of being totally connected with yourself and also completely separate, which to me is like the ultimate when I'm writing. When I get that feeling of like connection and disconnection all at once, it's the most perfect. That's the perfect when, and I don't hit that often, but when I do, it's just wonderful. And I guess a bit like when you hit certain moments in meditation where you glimpse something beyond yourself and then it goes again. It's a bit like that with writing, you glimpse it. But yeah, so I just experimented with it, and it's a really interesting way for me to move into different stories, move out of the everyday thing that I maybe come up with while I'm thinking of what story I might want to write. It just is another way in, and through the body. So I hope that explains it a bit more. It's a bit odd.
It's a prompt, and so when you're in this and you've got the part of the body that's come to you, that's, I'm assuming you're not picking the part of the body, you're just in this state and a part of the body is speaking to you. So do you then focus on that part of the body in a sort of a meditative state and then just wait for something to come as maybe someone else would do with another prompt, like a word? They're looking at a word and then something just arises from that word. Is that?
Yeah, I think the idea, like when you're writing from prompts as well, is just to really try not to overthink it. And so I actually didn't spend too much time in that space. It was just like, oh, okay, my neck wants to tell a story, let's start writing. So it's sort of stream of consciousness, almost not lifting the pen type of thing, which, you know, in prompt, a lot of prompt work, that's what they suggest, you know, 5 minutes timed, and try not to lift your pen off the paper. And if you can't think of anything to write, just write, I can't think of anything to write, and see what comes next, you know. So it was more that I tend to, when I do these things, my experience of them is I tend to feel into these spaces pretty quickly. That's my personal experience, but I think that can help as well, to just get, you know, straight away writing, and just not judge it, not think about it, not question it, just like see what it is. Timer goes off, and then you look back and see if you like it, and if it's something you might want to continue with.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting concept, and I really love the way it is like the physical leading you into the non-physical in a way. I just think that it's really, really interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about character, because in one of your newsletters you said, no, it wasn't the newsletter, I think it was in the Instagram post on the Sabre tree, you said, I had this relationship with my characters, and, you know, it was just being with them in my head and being with myself with them, and I could really relate to that, because when characters appear for me in all of the novels, even the unpublished ones, or the unpublished ones as well, they're very real to me, and they have their own personalities. They're not me necessarily, although I may give them my emotion. I would give them my emotion, but they're, and I'm just fascinated, like where do these people come from? Do they come from some sort of realm beyond me? Have I just collected over my years on the planet, my mind has just hooked, like it's got little hooks, and it's just been collecting all kinds of bits and pieces from everyone I've met, or people that, and then it all goes on some big sort of kaleidoscopic mix, and then I'm writing, and it all sort of like fizzles out into one person or one character. I haven't done this I'm actually very careful not to recreate people I know, but I have heard, because the last thing I want is people I know reading saying, oh yeah, that's me. But I have heard people say if they're angry with someone, they'll take a bit of that person and they'll stick it into a character for some sort of, you know, I guess kind of creative revenge or whatever. But for you, Susannah, with the novels, like, do you just let them come and you don't question, or do you have some theories of where your characters are coming from?
I think it's probably, like you said, like a kaleidoscope, like all of the above in a way. For example, with my most recent novel, which it's called On Solid Ground, so I can mention it now from more easily rather than the one set in Mexico City. The novel, I started with just an idea. I had this small idea about the size of kitchens in Mexico City. And I sat down and I was like, I'm just going to write 500 words. And by the time I'd finished those 500 words, a family had appeared. And so I don't know quite where they came from. But, you know, I had lived in Mexico City, and I had a partner who was from Mexico City and had spent time with his family, and they're not his family, but there's pockets of different people that I've probably met along the way in my life, and people that have said things that, I mean, I find with age, I'm getting quieter. And when I'm in groups, and I think it's partly because I'm just observing everyone, and I don't mean to, but I'm like, oh, that's an interesting way that they're speaking. Well, that's an interesting thing they just, you know, like, because then that informs all of the writing, and we're you know, observing people and places, and for me, in a new place, because I'm a travel writer, I'm just trying to work it all out. I can go quite silent. But so I think it's a bit of both. I think these characters come from our sort of lived experiences, but then they also they take on a world of their own. I don't know what they're going to do, and then suddenly they're doing something. I'm like, why are we doing
This
that?
happens to me as well. You know, I've been had characters in a conversation. I'm thinking of a couple by a fire. They're just talking, and then all of a sudden one says to the other, you know, I'd like to go build a snowman. I'm like, what? Where did that come from? And then all of a sudden I find myself chasing them out into the snow to build the snowman. I didn't even know we were, and it's sort of like if I was with them, I'd be like, really? I didn't know we were going to be doing that. If I'd known we were going to be doing that, I would have brought my mitts and my boots. You know, like it's, yeah. And to me, I love it when that happens.
It's the best feeling, because then you know the story's being led. And it's certainly with my first book, because that was historical fiction. And so there was a lot of kind of research involved, but there were moments where I couldn't do research because of limitations of where I was and books I could get hold of. And I would write things that felt like they were kind of, you know, I didn't know quite where they'd come from. And then I'd be doing the research later and find out that that was what happened. And so then you go, well, what's really happening? You know,
this is one thing I was going to ask you before I asked you what I was going to ask you. When the story is leading you, and this is something that I'm, you know, trying to tackle on the YouTube channel in general. It's all, I want to say, it's all fine and dandy if where you're being led is, you know, still above board. But with The Girl on Harlow Street, we're talking about an ultra explicit, affairs all over the place, and a murder mystery. And, you know, that story was leading me to places where, as the writer, I'm like, I don't know if I want to go there. You know, that's, but it's like, I know that in the past I've not gone there. And I've been too fearful. And so with this story, I let myself go down the garden path, literally down the garden path, because, you know, some stuff happens on the garden path. But the story led thing can put the author in a bit of a bind if the story's leading in a way. So while I use the example of the snowman, which I think is very innocent, you know, which happens in The Girl on Harlow Street, it's a Victorian solicitor, you know, he's a very sort of inhibited in some ways. So building a snowman in this particular circumstance would be a big deal for him. But for me as a writer, it's very innocent. Mm-hmm. But in the same story, when somebody wants to go to bed with someone else, and it's like, oh no, here we go. And then I have to kind of like, and so in the snowman thing where I'm saying, really, we're going to be doing this, really? It's like, okay, but then I have to do that in all these other scenarios too. Like, oh, great. We're pouring arsenic now, are we? Like, you know, there's this, it is this, do you know what you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think actually that's the freedom that we get as writers to do all sorts of things that we wouldn't normally do in our day-to-day life. And that became really clear to me during the lockdown, you know, that I was writing and I was going off to Coyoacán in south of Mexico City to have ice creams, where I was stuck in my house, you know, and
exactly,
or whatever it may be. And that's, you know, that's a very sweet example in comparison to the arsenic. Yeah, like I think that's the joy of it. And actually something that I talk quite a lot about with various of my mentoring clients is trying to make sure that your characters are a little bit removed from yourself. Because what can happen, I think, when your character is too close to you, it actually limits what you allow your character to do. Because then you're like, oh, well, you know, they wouldn't do that. And it's like, well, wouldn't they, or wouldn't you? And that, I think, I often, the suggestion that I've given to quite a few of my clients is to give your character one characteristic that you don't have, at least one, that you just like something that is just really not something you don't have. And that can it just is like a switch for freedom for your character, that suddenly your character can do things that lead you out of the bounds of your own life. And so it seems like you don't need that at all. Your characters are already off doing their thing because you set them free. And ultimately, I think that's what we want, is our characters to be free. I think different people write in different ways. And I know people that plan really heavily struggle, or maybe it's not as easy to let your character just be as free. From what I understand, I'm not a planner. I think they call it a pantser, which I don't like. And I heard a discoverer the other day, and I think I prefer to be a discoverer. But it just like this freedom that you can allow your characters to have when you're not planning, I think can be just really fun and part of the joy of writing, right? Like that you sit down and you don't know what's going to happen. I sat down every day to write 500 words and I didn't know what was going to happen. And that's brilliant, because that's what I write for.
Well, I think that's brilliant too. And I love it when that happens. And I also think it's good because if that's happening to you, then that's going to happen to the reader. If you're going through that, right, then you're going to be surprised, and because you don't know what's coming up, but that's how your reader's going to be. And so, well, I mean, that's just the ideal, and what you said about things showing up that you've written about afterwards, that's another thing that really fascinates me, because that's definitely happened to me. And then you start to think, oh, exactly, what's going on here? Because I've written this, I'm thinking of characters, but I didn't know these people when I was writing. And then all of a sudden, I've got something, all of a sudden people show up and you're like, oh my goodness, I've just written you. And that's eerie. I find that eerie. It's not eerie. It's not so much eerie, like it freaks me out in a kind of a supernatural way. But then I get the fear, as if like when they read this, they're going to think that I've written about them when I didn't even know them, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think that can bring that spark of like excitement of knowing that you're on the right track. And then also, it brings some fears with it. Absolutely. And I think really interesting around this, like letting the characters do what they want. And I think creating some level of container for the characters is really important too. Because I think if you let the characters just entirely do their own thing, you might end up with a very unruly, novel that's going off all over the place. So I think it's almost like that kind of well, I'm not a mother, but like motherhood of creating this safe container in which a child can explore and be free, but also there's a container around it, like some level of container, which I guess is the plot, which creates that container around how far you can go, because sometimes I feel like you have to rein them back in.
I think so too. And I also think that I haven't explored this yet in the channel, but I hopefully will down the road, is with the ethics of writing. So I if we're letting characters just do whatever they want, well, I mean, actually lots of people do, but I think every writer is going to have different things that they will write about that they won't write about. So there's certain things that I won't write about. Now, because my story, the girl on Harlow Street specifically, is very explicit. Obviously I will write about that, but other people probably wouldn't touch that at all. They're like, no, I'm not doing that. And I don't, and again, it's not that I set out to do that, it just happens. And then you start to question, well, what does that say about me? But definitely that comes out. But I think for me, there are parameters in terms of ethics that I wouldn't go, well, I mean, I just wouldn't go and start writing about certain things. So there's my own, I suppose that's my own container that I'm giving the characters, that there are limits that for me as a writer that I won't cross. So I have, I guess, a couple of questions left. One, which I think about all the time, is artists being paid for their work. And I think because my project, you know, I did hire, for someone writing a novel, it was a fair amount of people to hire, because I had, you know, the editor and the marketer and the videographer and the lawyer and things like that. And it was really important to me that I paid everyone. You know, I made a point of hiring people who were very early on in their careers, or they were in school, like the illustrator was still in school, because I wanted to give them this paid work experience, you know, so that they would know what they were worth, and very big on that. But then me as the creator, sort of investing in them, you know, I still haven't made money on these projects. But for me, I wouldn't be able to write the novel if I was busy, preoccupied about, oh, okay, I want to sell this, I want to make money on it. Like, I need to be, part of being in the zone for me is being disconnected from that. And I just wanted to know what you thought about that. You know, writing, when you're writing a novel, you're not making money at that stage unless you've been, what is it, you've been forwarded, you know, you've been given an advance. But for most people, you know, you're writing not for money. And how does that sort of work with the concept that, you know, very valid concept that artists should be paid for their work?
Yeah, I do. I really hear you on this idea that sort of what I'm hearing is like not putting the monetary value on something that kind of is perhaps much more than that, and that can create restrictions. And I know, at the risk of sounding like an Elizabeth Gilbert fangirl, which I am, but she talks about you know, not making your creative work have to pay the rent. And I think that's really important. And I fell into that trap a little bit with my first novel. I kept wanting to, you know, not do anything else and just do that. And I still want to just, well, I actually would, I want to write fiction and mentor, because I just love it. But I was finding, as I say, this kind of juggle of the journalism and the fiction hard. And so I kept wanting to give that up and just write fiction. And that's actually not viable. And it puts so much pressure on your creative life. And there's the other side of people that I know who have, you know, established authors, have book deals. And, you know, I sort of hope for that. But then you have the other things that come with that you've got an advance, and you're restricted in your time frame, you're restricted in, you've pitched what your novel's going to be about, it can't really change significantly. You know, so that I think all along the what would you even call it, all along the line, there are different things that can kind of be tricky around money and creativity. So yeah, I think fundamentally it's back to that feeling of like why we do it, and doing it for the love of doing it. And I don't really know if I have an answer to this thing around, you know, artists should be paid, and therefore what to do in these kind of situations where you've paid everyone else. I do think there's lots of interesting ways that you can get paid now for writing beyond the kind of traditional mold. And I think that's really interesting. And I think it's especially interesting because there are voices that are not being heard. And those voices really just like not even just need to be heard, but are just how boring if they're not being heard. You know, like I just don't want to keep hearing the same voices. And so I really hope that as things are slightly moving away from traditional publishing, or maybe traditional publishing is slightly changing and opening, that we actually are going to have space for all different voices to be heard, and it not just be such a business model of like, oh, can we sell the book? You know, like current ideas around nonfiction, if you don't have a certain Instagram following, that a publisher may not take you on. And I really hope that starts to change, because that just, it feels closed minded to me. And and a bit short-sighted, because Instagram will go and then what's the next thing. So yeah, these are kind of, I guess my thoughts around it go beyond my own writing, just into this, like, what voices are we missing here when we're not actually allowing artists to get paid for their work, because that blocks out a lot of people from being able to make space to write.
And also too, and I mean, this is something that I've grappled with, is that the belief in yourself to go out and just do that it's not that easy, so like for me right now, I'm using LinkedIn as that platform to do these poems, and I don't want to even say using, it's, for me, it's just happening. It's just, that's the way it's manifesting itself, and that's what it is. And I often say, to the family, this is like Justin Bieber, in Stratford, which isn't far from where I live, just busking on the corner. He's just singing because he has to sing,
Yeah.
And I think that for me, like, I have to do these poems. I just have to do them. And I can't think about any money. I can't, it just is, it really just is. But in order to get to the point where you have the confidence to go with that justice, it's really hard. It's a journey. And I mean, I'm in my early 50s, so I would never have done this when I was in my 30s. It's taken me a long time to just get into that space where it's like, you know what, I just want to write. I'm going to just go and write. But what I would hope for, and I think that it will happen as everything opens up, and just the way that, young people are, they've grown up in a different world than I did when I was young. Well, in terms of the internet, there was no internet, Susannah, when I was young.
Me neither.
But I think about, you want them to have that confidence to just go and do and be and sing and dance, and then those stories will get told. I think that a lot of people just aren't in that headspace yet of just going and doing, so that they're, and then again, there's so many barriers. Sometimes they're economic barriers or social class. I mean, it's not so easy to just go out and to do that. But in my idealist way of thinking, I think it would be great if people did.
Something that I speak on quite a lot is really making space for your art, even if it's not being the thing that's bringing you money. And and that can be as little as 15 minutes a day if you really want to do it. And yet that is not possible for everybody. But I'd say for the majority of people that are, reading my newsletter, engaging with me on social media, etc., like almost, if you have time to be on social media, you have 15 minutes a day that you could be spending writing, right? And it's if you really want to do it. But it is really hard because we place so much value on what something is bringing us monetarily. And I think if we can kind of just like flip that switch, even if for 15 minutes once a week. And I wrote recently about, this idea that writing really just begets writing. Like once you do that 15 minutes, you start this creativity motor almost, and then that snowballs, and then you want more space for it. And I've seen it happen in multiple clients who don't have time to write, and then we just find these spaces, like realistically, because I think people have a tendency to be like, okay, I'll write 4 mornings this next week, and I'm always like, okay, what's realistic here? Is it 4 mornings, or is there what might happen on this day, because we want to do it. But if you can just find that one morning where you do your 15 minute, I don't know, that it snowballs, that motor starts, and that's where I think we can allow writing to fit in the gaps and not have to provide us something in return in order to be valuable. So just a little extra thought on that.
And also too, I'm finding now, but I'm thinking maybe I've always been like this to a degree of when you just do, when you do what you want to do, and I don't mean bad things, but just when you follow your heart, and you it leads you to things that you never would have expected, so I'm thinking, to go back to 215, and I have one more question before this is my wrap up statement, but it's coming before the last question because that's just what I want to do, I suppose. In 215, it's a hot July day, and I'm like, I need to do something creative today. I need to do something tactile. And I've never done a Day of the Dead altar before, but I think in the fall that I'm going to want to do that for my, with my Spanish students in November, but it's July, and, I'm at the crafting store in July, and then I'm online now. I need to find out how to make one. And then as a result of me kind of going with that, what in air quotes, we could say a whim. It's just an artistic, creative whim, but it's not a whim really, because it's gonna kind of trickle through the years on and off until right now to this interview. Well, I mean, often if you go with that thing, it may seem like frivolous, but it's going to lead you somewhere that's going to be very interesting, later. And I guess
Absolutely.
that's, as the mom of 3, that's what I want for them. I want them to sort of listen to that and kind of go with it, because it's going to lead, it's going to lead you to interesting places, and not just, if you don't follow. But my last question is, do the people around you need to understand your writerly mind, your imaginative self? And I mean, that might be a different answer for every writer. I mean, but what do you feel about that? Do your friends and family need to know what your mental activity, or need to understand the way that your mind works?
For me, when it comes to my writing, not really. I love it when they like what I write or are interested to read what I write, which I was hearing on a podcast recently. A guy said, nobody wants to read what you write. Your friends and family don't want to read what you write. And I was like, oh, well, that's disappointing. But I don't know. And yet my previous partner was a writer, and so a screenwriter. So we had that shared understanding of the writerly mind. And so I think it's extra joyous when somebody understands. But to me, as long as I have writing community, I think that's the key, actually. I have this big writing community now with the London Writers Salon, and I'm not here trying to promote them. They've just given me this writing space that I knew I needed. And like living in Mexico, I write in English. And so trying to find a kind of writers group I could never quite find it, because it was like a group of journalists, but that wasn't really what I was interested in doing. And so finding this online writers group, which kind of came as the result of the lockdowns, etc. They moved online and started this idea, has been a total game changer. Because now I have people that every Monday and Friday we do these check-ins, and I'm talking to people who understand. And so if I'm upset one day because something didn't happen how I thought it would happen, they know why I'm upset. And if I'm excited one day about something that other people would think, well, is she excited about that? They get it, and all of us have said it. It's just being around people that get it, I think, is really important. Having a writing community, people who understand that you're like putting your heart and soul into something when it's not paying its way, when it's not maybe having immediate success, when it's keeping you up at night. But having people who get that, I do think is really important. So I found that in my writing community, as opposed to necessarily in my friends and family, you know, like I feel like I have a lot of respect from my friends and family for what I do, and they're very supportive and respectful, but I don't know if I necessarily need them to like fully understand all those intricacies because of that community that I have.
I think because of the nature of my writing, I mean, I think that my story, The Girl on Harlow Street, I mean, I wouldn't be working on it if I didn't think that it was a good story. But because of the explicit content, I personally don't think that, and nor would I want my children to be interested in it or reading it. But the bits and pieces, you know, and with my husband's, he's not a reader per se, but he is very interested in the daily poetry posts on LinkedIn. So he usually, while he's having his breakfast, he wants to hear the poem of the day and maybe listen to a few of the comments. But he was always very helpful in a structural way. So, you know, back with the first novel, he would take it to Toronto, the hard copy, to the agent, and he would, so very, again, very physically helpful. Or, you know, with, I don't want to say with tech things now, but in the past with tech things. So still very supportive, but not content, not about, not having anything to do with the content, the structural, the scaffolding around it. But you're right, because lately, in the last year, you know, I've been part of a creative group, and I've found that to be extremely helpful. And then now on LinkedIn, connecting with other artistic people, and it does it, and it actually makes me feel less seeking of, I don't want to say validation, but less seeking of friends and family for their interest in what I do, because I'm fulfilled. You know, if I'm artistically fulfilled by other people who are like me, then I find that when I'm with, you know, when I'm with my children and my husband and my family, I'm less needing of that, and I'm able to appreciate the things that they do contribute, which are equally as necessary. Yeah, so
that's beautiful. Yeah,
so
the joys of a writing community, it can be quite life-changing.
So before I end, is there anything else you'd like to cover or ask, or?
No, I mean, maybe down the line, talk to you about, you know, the kind, I'd love to know more about the things that you're writing. I know we've spoken about it a bit before, but maybe, I don't know if that's a bigger conversation, because I love this this conversation that you have in your world around the kind of explicit, like the erotic writing that you're doing, and then coming back to kind of normal life. So I don't know if there's something you want to share now, or something for another time.
I think we can do that another time, but I also think something that's really, again, it's interesting to me. I don't know how to explain it, but I suppose like we're multifaceted beings, and the things that I'm doing at the moment creatively are all, it's still from me. So there's the themes are still kind of run through everything, but the YouTube channel is completely different from the poetry posts. The poetry posts are completely different from the novel. And then there's this thought, well, people who are reading the poems on LinkedIn, which can be very spiritual, but definitely because it's on, you know, it's on LinkedIn, there's no explicit material in those, would be absolutely shocked once, if they decide, okay, now we're gonna read the novel, because the novel is explicit, and it is extremely explicit, not all the way through, but enough, heavily, right? And even though the themes are the same, it's different style of writing, it's different. And I think it's, for me, I like the freedom. Like, I can't just write meditative, spiritual you know, poetry every day. Like I need a little bit of infidelity and murder and smokes. What do they say? I was going to say smoke and daggers, smoke and mirrors. What is it? Where do the daggers go? There's daggers, smokes and mirrors. I need that, you know, that's fun. And it's also like, it's stealth, you know, like and I find that really exciting. And then on the YouTube, then I can kind of, this is in its really early days. So, you know, then I can kind of go into the psychology of it, and that's a pure exploration. I'm not a psychologist, but I don't know quite where we're headed with that, but it's all an explanation. But one thing I'm very, very passionate about with the explicit writing is that I you know, I really do want to, I guess, beautify or to shine a beautiful light on graphic material. Graphic does not have to be pornographic. It doesn't have to be. In fact, that's a very unhealthy, you know, when I like to take these things, childbirth, sex, all of that, and really give it the beauty that it deserves. And for me, I just think it's a more positive attitude toward it in general, towards sex in general. I think it's so there is a little bit of I don't know what to say, not activism in a way, but I feel the need. You know, I somehow feel that, and it's not even intentional. It's just when I write, that seems to come out. And again, it's just a case of going with it, not holding it back, not stifling it. And the feedback that I've had, and I mean, I've only had 14 readers, but the feedback has been really positive. Like nobody's come to me and said that they're offended. In fact, I've had the opposite. I've had people come to me and say, oh, I've been waiting for something like this. And then that for me is really, really affirming, you know. And I think that's another great thing about with my husband, right? So I mean, I don't know how many husbands would be comfortable with their wives writing like this, but that to me as well, I'm sure that men wouldn't be questioned as much as women writers on what they're putting out in the world. But luckily for me, you know, Francisco's really supportive of that, and that's just, you know, for me, that's great, because, you know, I do want the support of my spouse while I'm writing like that. You know, I would hate to think that I was writing like that and it was creating a lot of tension. But yeah, so that's what I can say about that. But I think maybe to go any further is a discussion for another time.
I love that. And I love that as writers, we can dip into these other worlds, you know, and it's the same for me with my journalism. I get to dip into different things. I can be an anthropologist or an archaeologist for the day, and you know, and that's what we get to do as writers. How lucky are we?
I think so too. I think it's great. So before I push stop on this video, is there anything that I'm going to put the links below anyway, the videos to your newsletter, your website, but is there anything that you want to promote before we end?
No, I don't think so. I just, if anybody wants to, stay in touch, I'm on Instagram as well at Susannah Rigg, and no, nothing particular to promote, just happy to keep having the conversation about writing. So if people want to get in touch, I'd love to hear from anyone.
Well, thanks so much, Susannah. And I feel really relaxed now because I've now finished my first interview. And I'm so happy that it was with you. That's really great. So thanks so much.
Thank you. That was really fun to talk.
Okay.